Hi, this is Dale Cummins with Cummins Architecture and Design. Today we'd like to talk to you a little bit more about ADUs, which stands for Auxiliary Dwelling Units. That's what's right here, ADU, all right? So it stands for Auxiliary Dwelling Unit. What it allows you to do is to put a second unit on a single family residence, which is kind of a cool thing these days. The laws in California have changed recently to allow this to take place. If you just Google ADUs, you can learn about it. But some of the basic requirements for an ADU are parking requirements. You're required to have 3 off-site parking spaces. But the interesting thing is you are now allowed to convert your existing garage into an auxiliary dwelling unit as long as you have the required parking spaces for it. So that's kind of cool. Some of the things to look for when considering an ADU are the setbacks of the specific piece of property you're working with, the lot coverage, and also the percentage of coverage allowed within the rear yard setback. And it varies in every city. In Rancho Cucamonga, for example, you're allowed to go within 5 foot of the rear yard and side yard if your auxiliary dwelling unit is a single-story structure and its height is less than 16 feet. Now, I'm going to put a qualifier in here because that changes all the time, but that's based on our information on the last project we did that was current as of the time of this filming. So some of the other things to think about, for example, on lot coverage, your property, depending upon where it's located and what residential zone, or maybe it's even in a commercial zone, will determine the amount of square footage or lot coverage that you're allowed to build on your property. In Rancho Cucamonga, for example, they include anything with a roof on it as part of the lot coverage, and there are some areas that the lot coverage is limited to 25%, which is very low. So those are things to think about. Also, it's not uncommon to come across a 5 foot, a 10 foot, and in some cases a 10 foot and 20 foot side yard setbacks, depending upon the density and the designation of the particular piece of property. Some of the other things to consider are the easements, like we mentioned in terms of power lines or utility lines or drainage easements. Those are all things that will usually show up on your survey or topo maps. Existing utilities are important to check for electrical, the hookup locations, for possibly if you have existing solar, natural gas, and septic or sewer. Those will all have an impact on the project itself. If you have an existing septic system, it may need to be upgraded, but and a lot of times you can use the existing system. With respect to utilities and some of the things that you'll be working with on the auxiliary dwelling unit, a lot of times we'll try to use a tankless water heater because we don't want to use that square footage that's so precious in the smaller homes that we'll try to find a location for a tankless water heater. It can either be on a back wall or an attic space, and that allows us to save room on the main floor. One thing to consider is sometimes the water meter has to be increased, the size needs to be increased, and also the gas lines. So those are important things to check when you're considering changing from a tank type water heater to a waterless water heater. Some of the things to consider in an auxiliary dwelling unit with the kitchen requirements are like wheelchair access, particularly if it's a retired or senior couple that's going to be living there. Pantry and storage. Storage is kind of a really big deal because you're typically going to be living in smaller square footage areas, so any place that you can develop some additional storage in the layout and design is always helpful. Is there enough storage? That's a question to ask. And then any special amenities or things that you'd like to include in that project, make a bullet list item and get those down on paper so that they're carried through the design to completion. Covenant agreements is one other item to consider with ADUs or auxiliary dwelling units. A covenant is a document, a recorded document that the planning department may ask you to complete particularly in several of the local cities around here, and that is that they are requesting that if you build an auxiliary dwelling unit on your property, they want you to be, one of the owners needs to live in one of the two properties. Doesn't have to be the larger one, but at least one of the two. So for example, if you have a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot home and you want to build a 1,200 square foot ADU, move into it, and then rent out the larger home, you're allowed to do that. But the covenant or deed restriction that they're asking for quite often is that you're going to live in at least one of those two spaces. So that's something to consider. It will be something that we'll look at as the project moves forward, but you can get that basic information from the planning department. It's fairly easy to contact them and ask them about any covenants or restrictions associated with an auxiliary dwelling unit. One other thing to keep in mind is sometimes it's actually better just to provide an addition that basically functions like an auxiliary dwelling unit, but it doesn't have all the specific requirements and criteria for that. And we can show you how that can be done also. We've done that several times. So hopefully that's helpful. We'll look forward to speaking with you again soon. And check us out on our website at CumminsArchitecture.com. Thanks for checking in. Talk to you soon.